The curious rise of protected and promoted Nazis in Australia. Coming up on this week's Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report. It's the 4th of December 2025. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined today by Citizens Party researcher and writer Richard Bardon. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks, Robbie. And also in this week's show, Dan Duggan watch. Beware the government extraditing an innocent Australian under cover of Christmas. Japan demands Australia forget history. More window dressing for the AUKUS money pit, and carnage in post offices.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Before we begin, remember this show is not about just information. The Citizens Party puts this information out because we are activists, we're a political party, and we want to do something about what we talk about. And you can help by helping to get this information around. Share the show widely, please. Like it, hit the like button straight away. Subscribe if you're not a subscriber. Remember to hit the bell icon so you get notified of other content from us. Please comment below. I always try and engage with the comments. They're actually quite good feedback. And I've had some public meetings lately where people have come up to me and mentioned that we've had an interaction on the comment section on Twitter, which is good.
You're slowly doxing these anonymous commenters?
Slowly, yep.
Just kidding. Keep commenting.
Donate, please. Our party is gearing up massively to really intervene on a much bigger scale in Australian politics, and we need the support of ordinary Australian citizens. We don't get the support of corporations or unions or money from the government. So everything comes from everyday Australians, so that you can help us by donating. And then finally, we are in the middle of a massive membership drive. Following the election, we decided to go on a membership drive. We're getting registered in multiple states. I was in Sydney last weekend for the Citizens Party event where we celebrated the qualifying for registration in New South Wales, which was an enormous effort. And hats off to, it's one of the reasons that regular viewers might be wondering, how come we don't see Craig Isherwood on the show much anymore? Well, Craig has spent we're based in Melbourne, but Craig has spent a lot of time in Sydney at our office up there in Penrith, spearheading that process. And we pulled it off, and we're going to be able to get registered in New South Wales. Dr. Andy Schmulo attended that event and announced that he would be contesting the New South Wales election for the upper house. And so you'll see a lot of our work gathering around that election coming up in New South Wales. I'm off to Adelaide on Saturday, where we're having an event on Saturday because we've qualified to get registered in South Australia. We will be next targeting Queensland and Victoria for registration. And the Citizens Party is going to become an electoral force at the local level, state level and federal level. And you can be part of that by becoming a member. You need a mass membership base with lots of people who can be volunteers for your party's activities. And the thousands of people who watch this show every week, you're all invited to get involved. All right, let's get into the updates first, Richard, and then we'll get into the main feature. So, first of all, Dan Duggan watch. Beware the government extraditing an innocent Australian under cover of Christmas. We're putting out a statement today on email, and we put it in the Australian Alert this week. Twice in the time that Dan Duggan has been in prison, the Australian government has used the cover of Christmas to, first of all, in December 2022, just after he was arrested, that's when the Attorney General then, Mark Dreyfus, first approved his extradition to the United States. And then that led to a lot of appeals, etc.
Yeah, well, approved the application and then it had to go through the process.
But you did it under cover of Christmas. And one of the reasons you do it under cover of Christmas is because you want to minimise publicity for this because it's such a shocking case. It is shocking. We are destroying an innocent man and his beautiful family to serve the demands of a foreign power. So we'll put a link to the statement below. We won't go through all the details now, but we're in the statement. We talked about all the various factors in the Dan Duggan case, but you can put them all aside and just focus on the very basic thing that the first question the Australian government should have asked when the American government said to them, we want you to extradite that guy, was, is the crime you are accusing him of a crime in our country as well? And the answer was no. And that is called, that is a principle of extradition called dual criminality. It's the most important criteria to be met, and they didn't meet it. And instead, what they then did, because they didn't want to say no to the Americans, they then retrofitted a 2018 law that didn't really apply to what he was accused of doing in 2012 and said, okay, that satisfies the dual criminality, right? Now, one of the questions that needs to be asked here is if that 2018 law is truly meets the requirement of dual criminality, that means that Dan Duggan broke Australian law. Why hasn't the Australian government charged him? Richard, at least if they charged him, you know what would happen to him? He would get legal aid.
Yeah, you qualify for court-appointed attorney.
Exactly.
Commonwealth legal aid.
His family has been bankrupted by this process because it's an extradition thing. It's like they throw him into purgatory, right, in limbo, while because he hasn't been charged, he doesn't qualify for legal aid in Australia. So the family's been bankrupted trying to fund his legal case. They tried to sell a property that Safreen Duggan owned, and the Americans came in and put a caveat on it so they couldn't do that.
Yeah, claiming it was the proceeds of crime.
One
wasn't a crime, and two, she already owned it, bought it separately, and it's worth 10 times as much as what he's alleged to have profited from his crime that wasn't.
And they offered to quarantine the amount that was alleged to be part of the crime and be able to use the rest of the money. Oh, no, because this is a stitch up. The Australian government has worked with the American government to make sure that this guy gets extradited, and there's numerous hypotheses why. One of them, the overarching one, is they're making an example of this guy. There are people who just want to destroy any business that's being done with China in the West. But the other one was raised at a Senate inquiry or a Senate hearing in America a few years ago, where one of the US Defence Department officials actually cited Dan Duggan as proof that the Australians could be trusted with America's technology on AUKUS. So in other words, it's as if that part of our government is sacrificing this guy to as a show of good faith to the Americans, right? Anyway, so what we're saying now is we're on Dan Duggan watch, because last Christmas, the 2 days before Christmas, the Attorney General Mark Dreyfus did the final approval of his extradition. He could have been extradited as of the 1st of January, and the problem with that was because it was Christmas, the courts were closed, right? The family had no ability to go to court and get an injunction. Now, as it happened, he wasn't bundled off straight away, and so he was still in Australia by the time the courts opened again, and the family did go to court, right? And that's why he's still here. But right now, we are waiting to hear the results of what happened on the 16th of October, where there was a court hearing in Canberra where Dan's legal team was able to challenge the Attorney General's, the basis of the Attorney General's decision-making. We have a new Attorney General now, Michelle Rowland, and she has said and done nothing about this case. But because we're coming up to Christmas again, what I'm concerned about is that the judge who reserved his judgment on the 16th, the judge could decide, again in a couple of weeks, just before Christmas, to hand down his decision. And straight away, Michelle Rowland goes, that's it, he's out of here, right? And nothing can be done. So what we're asking people to do, we'll put the links to Michelle Rowland, we'll put the statement below and you'll see where you can contact Michelle Rowland. Start calling and emailing her office. Do it every day if you want, do it once a week if you want, whatever, just do it, to say, don't you dare extradite this innocent guy under cover of Christmas, justice for Dan Duggan, free Dan Duggan. Just so she knows that she's not going to be able to get away with doing this secretly. We will be watching, we'll get thousands and thousands of people to watch. All right, moving on. Japan demands Australia forgets history. And Richard, this is a follow-up from what Lisa and I talked about last week, but the follow-up is because one of the people we're talking about, who's the Japan's former ambassador to Australia, he came out the other day in the Australian newspaper criticising Australia because we haven't said anything about this war of words between Japan and China at the moment.
Yeah, the new Prime Minister, Takaichi, shooting a mouth off about threatening to go to war over Taiwan as though it was some existential vital interest of Japan, when it's absolutely nothing to do with them according to their own legal instruments.
So this guy Shingo Yamagami, he's in the Australians saying, we backed you up in 2020 when China tried to coerce you. You should be backing us up. But this is the same guy. We went through his CV a bit last week. This is a guy who denies Japan's culpability in its war crimes. He is an open denialist. And we gave the examples. Go back and look at last week's show if you haven't seen it. We gave the examples. This is someone that should disturb us greatly. He is part of this new faction of, well, it's not that new, but it's sort of getting bigger. This faction of Japan that is now wants to remilitarize. They've basically found a workaround around the Constitution, clearly backed up by the Americans. And that's bad enough that we should be concerned that a country like Japan wants to remilitarize. I mean, Japan's commitment to pacifism since World War II has actually been a cornerstone of regional peace. And for most of the Japanese people, they like that, right? They've been secure. No one's attacked them. They've gone on with a spectacular economy, except for the last few years. But now there are people in Japan that want to remilitarize. So we should be disturbed about that, but we should be more disturbed that the people who want to remilitarize are like this guy who say, we didn't do anything wrong in World War II.
Yeah, they want to paraphrase a certain famous American buffoon, make 2025 1935 again.
That's right. Now, I want to play a couple of clips from a video because I want to illustrate this. It's disturbing how many mates this former Japanese ambassador has in Australia. And one of those mates is a commentator who's often on Sky News and sometimes 60 Minutes, who's one of these China experts in Australia. His name's Andrew Phelan. And the other day, Andrew Phelan did a sort of like a podcast interview with Erin Molan. And Erin Molan is the daughter of the former Senator Jim Molan, who was one of Australia's generals in the Iraq War. Yeah.
Known as the Butcher of Fallujah, and you can look up Fallujah and see why that's valid.
Yep, that's what people have called him. Look it up, and you make up your own mind what you'd think about that. He's passed away now, of course. His daughter Erin is she's a fanatical pro-Zionist, just an utter extremist on that front. But they did this interview together, just a half an hour of just intense China bashing, blaming China for everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything from drugs and fentanyl going to the United States. That's all China's. It's not just China's fault that the precursors come from China. Now, just a quick aside, Richard, I wanted to ask you a question on this. What chemical exists in the world where the precursors don't come from China? Seriously.
China and India between them. India used to be known as the world's pharmacy, but these days and when you say precursor chemicals, these are just generic chemicals that can be used to make any number of different compounds, many of which are, this includes these medicinal compounds like fentanyl, which is sold all over the world. It's used legitimately in hospitals as a tranquilizer and sedative for humans, for animals, for everything. But because the base ingredients of that are made in a factory in China for the most part now, this must all be China's fault. America's the only country that has a fentanyl problem.
But they don't call it China's fault. They don't just call it China's fault.
They say,
this is warfare.
Yeah, they say this is some sort of grey zone warfare and they're doing this to us on purpose. Well, okay, prove it. But of course they can't because it isn't a thing.
This guy, Andrew Phelan, he actually said, thousands of young Americans are dying. China's making money. What's not to like from China's standpoint? And the way he talks about China, he thinks they're utter monsters. Right? This guy is totally deranged when it comes to China. Yeah. He thinks the Chinese people are utter, despicable monsters. Well, I've just been to China. This guy and I have had lots of arguments over the years. He nicknamed me Layover because he used to say to me, have you ever been to China? And until a few months ago, I had to say no. I've only ever had a layover once in Guangzhou on the way to Europe, and so he nicknamed me Layover. So now I have been to China. I found the Chinese people to be very nice and warm and friendly. And the idea, and they don't have a drug problem in China because they genuinely police drugs.
Yeah, they did a real war on drugs.
They did a real war on
fake
drugs.
One.
That's right. So Mr. Phelan, he has that kind of view of the Chinese. Now, but I had to. What was the other? Oh, he also attacked the Chinese for TikTok, right? Because in America, TikTok is degenerate, but that's just the algorithm.
Yeah.
In China, Chinese version of TikTok is quite wholesome, but the Chinese don't tolerate degenerate things being spread around in public forums anyway.
And it's not a big part of the culture there like it is in other places.
Whereas all TikTok does is reflect the culture of the place that it's in. Yeah. Get on TikTok in Australia and you'll see that, right?
Yeah. And TikTok it's owned by a Chinese company. It's not based in China. It's dual headquartered in the United States and Singapore. All its data centers are in America. They're in Texas. They moved them there to comply with Trump's ranting and raving about.
There's a whole bunch of former FBI and that people working for TikTok in America now.
Yeah.
Right? And they've just sold it to the Americans anyway.
Yeah.
Right?
It's not a Chinese company. It's just it has its parent company is the Chinese company, and the algorithm that it uses to show you more of what it knows you want to see, what it determines you want to see, and it's the best in the world at it because that's all it does. It's not spyware like Facebook.
No.
It just does one thing really well. That algorithm was designed by these computer scientists in the parent company called ByteDance in China, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, the reason I'm just giving you a bit of a flavour of how this guy Andrew Phelan thinks. So what got my attention though more than anything else was the very week that this is happening, that there's a big spat between China and Japan because of the Prime Minister Takaichi's comments, and then this guy, this war crime denialist, comes to Australia and or says to Australia, you got to get in behind us, etc. He comes up in this thing, but so I want to play. We'll play them together. So I'll get the guys to run the clip. But first of all, you're going to see him say something about Guadalcanal. Andrew Phelan's going to say something about Guadalcanal, where he says it's he attacks the people. I think he's attacking the people who don't take China seriously enough, calling it shameful that we've forgotten the people who sacrificed their lives on Guadalcanal in World War II. And he even acknowledges they were fighting the Japanese. But he's trying to somehow say that if we're not fighting the Chinese hard enough, who weren't attacking us in World War II, they were allies. But then he makes reference to this particular ambassador. Roll the tape.
But back to the Pacific, I think we forget, say for example, the Battle of Guadalcanal, just to cite one example. A lot of young Americans died there, and they were using World War I era weapons, fighting against Japan, the Japanese infantry, who were thought to be unbeatable. This was after Pearl Harbor. And we've forgotten about them. Their sacrifice. Shame on us, because those young men died far away from home, fighting for the things that we take for granted today. So we saw a flashpoint of sorts in that the other day when Japan's new Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, had said, look, for Japan, this is an existential crisis. We knew that already.
Yeah, she's impressive, isn't she?
She really is. Yeah. My friend Shingo Yamagami, who was Japan's last ambassador to Australia, has been an advisor to her leading up to her becoming the Prime Minister.
Wow.
After he's no longer in public life, so he went back to Japan and wrote a book about China's wolf warrior diplomacy, which shot's #1 on the Amazon Japan list.
Actually, I'd love you to connect us so I can get him on my show.
Yeah, I'm sure he'd love to.
A big plug.
and then we had
Go figure. He's attacking the people forgetting forgetting the people who died on Guadalcanal at the hands of the Japanese. And then he's in his next breath, he is best friends with a Japanese political figure who denies Japan's culpability for all that. And in his view, China are the bad guys. I mean, this is an example, Richard, of what you're dealing with in Australia.
And if you can make sense of that, then probably as nuts as he is.
We will keep calling this out quite forcefully. I've had quite a few interviews lately with Chinese media. They're interested in the fact that there are Australians who do remember our sacrifice in World War II. We're not going to sweep it under the carpet because the Japanese want us to forget history because they want to remilitarize. My grandfather fought the Japanese on the Kokoda track. And as I like pointing out to people we discussed last week, you've got things like the newest seat in federal parliament, Bullwinkle, is named after a very well-known survival of one of Japan's most notorious massacres against Australia. Let's not pretend that didn't happen, people. And we could make a much more constructive contribution to peace if we actually spoke up about it and strengthen the hands of the people in Japan who don't want to go down this path and bring helps calm things in the region. All right, moving on, not unrelated though, more window dressing for the AUKUS money pit. Two things quickly, Richard, the wrong Richard, Mr. Miles, Defence Minister, he's cooked up a new agency.
Yeah, they're going to reinvent the wheel essentially, because they've already got an agency that basically does this job, but it's supposed to extend into the industry department now as well, via defence industry. But we've been saying for years, they've co-opted industrial policy, the Americans have, for this AUKUS thing and related nonsense. But so they're going to create a defence delivery agency, because they love this word delivery. It never delivers anything, except
but as long as it's in the name.
It delivers our money to the Americans.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And
someone gets it over there.
And so they're going to set this thing up where it's just going to take over the budget of defence. It's going to take over all the acquisition process. It's going to take over the industrial policy directly, explicitly now, instead of just by default like they've been doing for 4 years. And then when everything goes wrong, well, Miles won't be there. It'll be the next sucker. But that's their fault. That's
right. Now this is at a time when the Defence Department is spending, I think it's $1.3 billion a day, is the expenditure of the Department of Defence. Richard Miles pointed out when he made this announcement that Australia has increased its defence spending by the greatest amount ever in peacetime. And that's really alarming if you think about it, because, if it's in peacetime and we have never done this before, does that mean that we expect that soon we won't be in peacetime? And my particular concern, Richard, is because they're going to put a civilian in charge of this agency. They might have dusted off a book about Essington Lewis, who was in World War II, when there was an actual war and we were being threatened by the Japanese. The Curtin Chifley government turned to the head of BHP, the biggest industrialist in Australia, Essington Lewis, and made him Director of Munitions. That was his title, right? Which is sort of it's not the same words as this, but this new agency is supposed to kind of do the same thing. And did he deliver, right, as Director of Munitions? It's a fantastic story how he organised Australia industrially in World War II. The problem is that they can learn about that from history, but these people are incompetent. They're not going to be able to repeat that.
Well, and the fundamental difference is that we'd previously had a thing called the Munitions Board, that it was a government agency that developed new technologies and disseminated them for cheaply or for free throughout the economy. We had a small but world-class manufacturing sector right the way through that could be upscaled and was under Essington Lewis's watch.
But are they? My concern is, are they doing this now because, under the influence of the Americans, everything is geared towards expecting a war?
Yeah, and all of this expenditure is geared towards feathering the nests of American military companies. We don't have our own; they're all foreign. Mostly American, some European.
Now, related to that is they've also announced we didn't get an AUKUS inquiry. Right, Labor and Liberal combined to make sure there wouldn't be an AUKUS inquiry. So you still got that glaring contradiction where, of the 3 AUKUS partners, 2 of them, United States, United Kingdom, held inquiries. They're the ones who are being paid the money. The country that's paying all the money refuses to hold an inquiry, but instead, Richard, they've given us an oversight committee. There will be an oversight committee of the Parliament.
Yeah, this will be oversight in the other sense of the term. Oops. We didn't notice that. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, it's rigged. It's
raise your eyes. Yep.
This is like it's the same model as the Defence and Security Joint Committee, the Oversight Committee for the Spook Agencies and Defence Department. It's only the major parties.
Closed shop.
They're the parties of government, don't you know? So whoever's in government gets the majority of one. on these committees, and the senior opposition figure that on the committee gets to be deputy chair.
So there's going to be 7 members of the Labor Party, 6 members of the Liberal Party on this committee.
They won't be doing anything.
No.
They'll just be collecting the extra paycheck and rubber stamping whatever it is that the Americans want.
Now, contradiction, they will be doing something, because once we find out who they are, Richard,
Oh, they'll be, yeah.
they're going to be answering the phone. So they've done this to rig the process, like Richard just said. And remember, when you compare it to the committee that's oversight of ASIO, just to show you how blatant these guys, are when they just rig these committees so that there's only the 2 major parties in there. There's one person in Parliament who's genuinely qualified as a security analyst. Not only is he qualified, he has integrity. His name's Andrew Wilkie. And they won't let him within a bull's roar of the ASIO committee.
Yeah.
Right?
For anyone who doesn't remember, Wilkie was a senior ONA, now ONI, analyst who resigned in protest over the WMD lies that got us into Iraq.
Yep. Now, so what we're going to do is say, okay, if you want to play this game, you're making yourselves a target of the Australian people. So once we get the identity, you'll see us talking about this much more next year. We're going to be putting up the word, hammer these guys, flood them with calls and emails, these 13 people are going to be on this committee, and you hold them accountable for their role as oversight of the biggest scam in Australian history, AUKUS. All right, and then finally, Richard, on the updates, carnage in post offices. And we'll talk about this more in coming weeks, but I probably talk more about post offices than anyone in Australia outside of Australia Post. I was shocked this week when I just thought I'd get on the website of Australia Post and check what the latest number of post offices is, because they actually have a count on there, how many post offices in Australia. And the number was 4,118. And seriously, the last time I looked at that figure at the start of the year, it was 4,199. I gave interviews about it, citing that figure at the start of the year, right? 4,118 now. So what this means is that in the 4 years that Paul Graham has been the CEO of Australia Post, the guy that they put in there to make sure Christine Holgate didn't get her job back, he has closed 202 post offices. The first 2 years he closed 49. The last 2 years he's closed 153. In other words, he's closing them at an accelerating rate. And he said in Parliament in 2023 that as far as he's concerned, his only obligation is to the bare minimum that is required to have by regulation, which is 4,000. That's all he's committed to having. Well, that means there's another 118 on the chopping block.
Yeah, and I mean, this guy's nickname in the corporate world is Scissor Hands, because he just cuts everything, cut spending, cut salaries, cut conditions, make more profit. That's what Morrison brought him in to do. That's what Albanese's kept him on to do. This is the plan.
But these are essential services. Now, let me quickly play a video. I was in Sydney last week, and I visited the Milsons Point post office, and I decided to make a quick video in front of that post office. Just run the tape. I'm here at the Milsons Point post office, and what's interesting about this post office, and seems to be unique, is that it is the only post office that I know that has been able to reverse a decision by Australia Post to close it. This is a corporate post office, so Australia Post owns it. 2/3 of Australia Post post offices are owned by small businesses, only 1/3 are corporate. And Australia Post has been closing these kinds of post offices like crazy. The locals in Milsons Point put up an enormous fight to stop it. Now, that's actually happened everywhere in Australia where Australia Post has closed the post office, but in this case it worked. And the way it worked, from what I can tell, is quite revealing. One, the building here is owned by a New South Wales government department, and the Australia Post's excuse for closing the post office was that the rent was going up. Well, Senator Andrew Bragg, Liberal Senator, who's quite a straight shooter, he got involved in response to the local fight here, and he did something that I want to know why Australia Post couldn't do it. He somehow got the New South Wales Government Department to agree not to put its rent up. And that took away Australia Post's excuse, and CEO Paul Graham had to reverse his decision, and now this post office stays open. So that's a good outcome for Milsons Point, but it's the exception that proves the rule, because Australia Post is gunning to close as many post offices as possible,
and Paul Graham hasn't cared about the impact on the community. We need a long-term solution to this. The Citizens Party's policy of a post office bank, which actually provides more revenue for post offices, is that solution. Look it up on the Citizens Party's website.
So that's quite a mystery to me, Richard. That's the exception that proves the rule. Milson's point is the only post office they said they were going to close now that got reversed. But one of the reasons it got reversed is actually universal. There's a massive backlash everywhere in Australia where post offices get closed, right? And for some reason, the Australian government is sitting on their hands while they're letting this guy do it. These are our essential services. And from the Citizens Party standpoint, we know that if we get up a government bank in post offices, it'll be the best thing in Australia's history, right? Start serving the Australian people in every community. But we're looking at this asset of Australia Post losing its capacity under this guy. Someone's got to step in and stop it. All right, we'll talk more about that in the future. Now, before we get onto the feature, just to reiterate, when we talk about this stuff on our show, this comes from research that the Citizens Party conducts in depth, and we publish that research in the Australian Alert. And we'll take a quick break, have a look at how you can subscribe to it.
The narrow agendas of mainstream media outlets are not telling you the full story. The weekly Citizens Party Australian Alert provides in-depth insights into issues that matter to all Australians. The Australian Alert holds a mirror to those in the halls of power, reporting on issues of national importance that are being buried by the major parties. It's reported on the misconduct of banks and major corporates, the persecution of those doing their jobs, and the failure of regulators to do theirs. Economic coverage puts real issues on the political agenda. There's serious analysis of global issues, the Washington Insiders Report, and the global threat from endless wars. Everything you should know every week is in the Australian Alert. Subscribe today for hard copy and digital versions.
Welcome back. Now for our main feature, the curious rise of Australia's protected and promoted Nazis. Richard, you've written a bombshell two-part series for the Alert. And the articles are, your local far-right extremist probably works for ASIO, and we previewed that a bit last week, and Australian neo-Nazis linked to West's war on Russia. Now, in your articles, you start with the point that the establishment has a long history, and by the establishment I mean all the people in government and all the sort of the power structures around them. There's a long history of the establishment fostering extremist groups. So just give us some examples of that.
Yeah, well, this ASIO, for starters, was, even before it was founded, post-World War II military intelligence, Charles Spry, Brigadier Charles Spry, who then became the first director of ASIO in 1949. They were bringing known Nazis over, Nazi collaborators from Eastern Europe, the Western periphery of the Soviet Union, over here for the Cold War, seeding them amongst diaspora communities, giving them new names, new identities, clean slates, and using them to propagandize people here and to inform for the government on anyone who might be sympathetic to the Soviet Union for the Cold War, or what they classed as pro-communist, which is basically anything except a fanatical anti-communist.
So these were real Nazis, and they helped us achieve our Cold War goals.
Yeah, and over in Europe, the resurrected, I forget the name of the Nazi intelligence agency, but they resurrected it straight after the war. And the same people were running around working for them, running counter-ops into the Soviet Union and all these sort of dirty tricks. This is all publicly acknowledged now. But they want you to believe that they just wouldn't do that anymore, right? And extremists of all stripes, by the way. It's not just, you know, we're talking mainly about the Nazi elements here, but there's the most infamous example in Britain is the thing called the Covenant of Security between MI5 and a bunch of what they call jihadist networks. So these backward reinterpretation, 19th century reinterpretation of Islam that people are familiar with from outfits like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Well, the British created that, or they fostered the groups that created that. They've been in their employ for 200 and something years. And in Britain, they had a thing called the Covenant of Security, where those groups were allowed to recruit, train, organise based in Britain, so long as they didn't conduct attacks in Britain.
And a lot of the worst terrorist groups around the world were headquartered in Britain.
Yeah,
And all those governments that were where the countries were victims of those groups, they kept complaining to the British.
Yeah, including the French across the Channel, and
Yep.
it was French security who started calling London Londonistan.
Londonistan, yeah.
And even after one of these guys, a convert, revert as the Muslims call him, but he had been converted, he'd been indoctrinated in this fanatical rebadge, this Al Qaeda style for a different group, but the same mentality, started blowing up buses in 2005. So they formally cancelled the covenant, but it's still in effect. They still use these guys. They just keep a bit closer tabs on them.
There's a lot of important journalists that have actually blown the whistle on this.
Even the Guardian.
another example you've given, though, is even an older one in Australia. What happened in the 1930s? We had actual extremist paramilitary groups, pro-fascist, and they were connected. They were very much creatures of the establishment.
Yeah, they were funded and led in some cases by the people who went on to found the Liberal Party. Yeah. The New Guard and the Old Guard, they were called, and there was others as well, but they were the main ones. They were there ready to rise up and overthrow, run coups against. These are all retired servicemen, returned servicemen from the war, including the guy who famously chopped the ribbon from horseback, the Groot at Sydney Harbour Bridge. They were ready to overthrow any government that didn't follow the agenda. And the agenda at the time was openly pro-fascist. Wilfred Kent Hughes praising Mussolini as the model for government, things like this. So very long history.
And we don't have time to go through it, but even look in American history, the FBI has a long history of infiltrating and directing extremist groups from the Ku Klux Klan on the one side to the Black Panthers on the other side. And anyway, so this is well known. That brings us to what the organisation, its flavour of the month in Australia, though. The National Socialist Network, aka White Australia. This group is so prominent now, it seems to have a PR firm.
Yeah, it's called Sky News.
Well, essentially. So tell us just briefly what you've been digging up about the leader, Thomas Sewell, and his background.
Yeah, so I know you guys talked about this guy a bit last week. Thomas.
What we showed last week is this guy is guilty of multiple assaults and avoids jail, even though it's like he avoided jail for that.
Yeah, openly spouts neo-Nazi slogans, ideology, symbols, recruits people to these movements, beats the hell out of people at the head of a gang of his little, helper monkeys, and gets off, if not scot-free, then very nearly too, and allowed to keep running around and doing all this stuff, most of which is now illegal, but he gets away with it anyway.
Now, funnily enough, he just got out. He was on remand for a while for his latest assault.
Yeah, they denied him bail as a danger to society, and then a different judge was brought in to overturn it.
But there's another character in their group called Joel Davis, who is in jail in New South Wales. But the funny thing there, Richard, is Joel Davis is in jail for what he said. He said something awful, but it's just words he said. He's in jail, right, awaiting some form of trial. Sewell, who committed undeniable crimes, right, it seems to be untouchable. But what do you know about him? What more?
All right, so this guy, he was born in New Zealand, but we won't hold that against him because he come over here as a small kid anyway.
Yeah.
No, he's raised in Melbourne, joined the Australian Defence Force, the Army, out of high school as an infantryman, there for only a few years. Gets it, but he has that training. Gets out, flunks a degree in civil engineering at Monash, and while because he was spending more of his time out organising these increasingly openly white supremacist and then overtly neo-Nazi groups. Starting with this thing called the United Patriots Front that people might remember. There was this big blonde-haired guy, Blair something, Cottrell.
Blair Cottrell.
Was the main spokesman for it, but he and Sewell were the two. Sewell was one of the organisers in behind this.
The UPF is launching its first political party called Fortitude.
They ran these anti-immigration protests and anti-Islam stuff and blame the immigrants and the Muslims for for everything and G people up like they're doing again now.
But not because, and don't think, when you hear what Richard just said, don't think, oh yeah, but we do have too much immigration. That's not their issue. Their issue is they want a purely white Australia.
They want a race war. They had plans. They got recorded and the videos got leaked by somebody talking about how they wanted to take over and racially segregate Australian cities on the model of apartheid South Africa.
Now, one thing that doesn't get remembered enough in this current, like in the last year or so, where this guy Sewell's been so prominent, is that he admitted openly that he tried to recruit Brenton Tarrant, the guy who committed the Christchurch massacre.
Yeah, they were both members of this UPF, United Patriots Front. There's some suggestion that Tarrant may have been a financial supporter of that with some of his inheritance, but that's not. I've not seen that confirmed. But yeah, this is the guy who was presumably been out of shape already, but he was, as we'll get into, indoctrinated, it would seem, and his mother believed, she told the Inquiry in New Zealand, indoctrinated by the Nazi groups, the militias and that Australia is supporting, and has just signed another $95 million of guns and money over to today or yesterday in Ukraine for this proxy war against Russia.
Good. Now, hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break. The Citizens Party, as I said, we're here to make a difference. Here's how you can join us.
You deserve a future where the people, not entrenched power, determines Australia's direction. That's why you should join the Citizens Party. You need post offices and regional bank branches to remain open. A government that invests in people, not submarines that will never arrive. And a foreign policy that's in our national interest. We've stopped the cash ban legislation and led the fight to hold major banks to account. Tens of thousands of Australians have signed our petitions, and it's made a real difference. It's time for action as we push towards our goal of 10,000 members. Join the Citizens Party at citizensparty.org.au and be part of the movement that's shaping Australia's future.
Authorised by Craig Isherwood, Citizens Party, Melbourne.
Welcome back, where we're talking about the curious rise of Australia's protected and promoted Nazis. And just before the break, Richard, you mentioned that Brenton Tarrant, who Thomas Sewell tried to recruit, his own mum said, hey, this guy, my son, has been influenced by Ukrainian Nazis.
Yep.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, and this came out, and it's a huge report, multiple volumes, and I'll give a nod to a very good independent investigative journalist named Peter Karatayev, who's he grew up in Ukraine, or mostly, according to his online bio, but he's a professional investigative journalist. He's written for Al Jazeera and other outlets. He runs a blog called Events in Ukraine, because he can read Ukrainian, Russian, and English, obviously. And it's a subscription blog on Substack, but it's usually like the first half of the articles are free. So if anyone wants to go check it out and get a flavour of it. But yeah, he's been reporting on this stuff that the mainstream media won't, because the official finding of the Christchurch massacre inquiry, after he murdered 51 people in 2 mosques in Christchurch in March of 2019, and was heading for a third when the police ran him off the road and booked him. This guy he spent at least 20 days, the official number is 20 days in Ukraine with the Azov brigade, battalion movement. Yeah. It keeps getting bigger. It's officially part of Ukraine's armed forces now. And these are open Nazis. Literally the grandsons of the Nazi collaborators from World War II.
Yep.
In a lot of cases, the leaders of this, along with some Russian Nazis who fled Russia, and they're trying to start a race war in Russia.
And if I got it right, the chronology right, Russia actually did a crackdown on Russian Nazis in long before the
2011
war started.
Or so.
Yeah, and so they fled to Ukraine where they would be welcome.
Yeah, and 2 of these guys, one guy's name is Dennis, basically, the Russian version, Denis Nikitin, and the other is Lyevkin. I forget his first name offhand, but these guys run these international radicalisation and recruitment networks. And it's not just, it's not purely neo-Nazism, it's also what they call accelerationist groups who go and encourage people, just do anything, any kind of terror, these lone wolf terrorists, anything that destabilises society, especially if it contributes to a race war.
Yeah, bring on the revolution.
School shootings, they've been geeing up. There's been some of these school shootings, like many of them foiled or didn't get very far, but in Russia itself, they've put out a third expanded translation in Russian of Tarrant's manifesto that's banned here. You get ASIO knocking on your door if you download it now. It's still floating around the internet, but don't do that. And this is the networks that the West, including Australia, supports, and this is what Sewell and his outfit are part of. And that's not speculation. These guys, half of his group, the current lot, the National Socialist Networks, or it's now rebranded itself White Australia because it wants to register as a political party and it couldn't use socialist. Part of that is his Lads Society, a white supremacist recruiting agency masquerading as a fitness club that he started in 2017 after the UPF, or around just before the UPF fell apart. He took it over and tried to recruit Tarrant to that, and he didn't join because he had other plans, including to do this massacre in New Zealand, and then if he escaped, he was planning to live in go and move to Ukraine with his mates over there, Azov and so forth. But the other group that merged with the Lad Society to create the National Socialist Network was called Antipodean Resistance. And it was formed, it was part of this website, this web forum called Iron March, that was a forum for all of these kind of groups, these right-wing accelerationist groups, Nazi groups, Satanists. There's all this weird blending of ideologies and things. And that's what went into the establishment of this group, of this National Socialist Network.
Which has now renamed itself White Australia.
White Australia. And that was part of these international networks that are used to recruit people and raise money for the Nazi battalions, the volunteer groups, the youth militias, radicalising people all over the world, including in Australia, via this outfit, to go and support Ukraine or fight for Ukraine in or commit atrocities at home.
And you've got this bizarre thing now where clearly it's been established that Brenton Tarrant was inspired by Nazis in Ukraine. In turn, he is now their inspiration.
Yeah, as I said, they've translated his manifesto into both Ukrainian and Russian, because most Ukrainians, geographic Ukraine, most of they're native Russian speakers, including the president. He struggles to speak actual Ukrainian. But in any case, so they call this, there's memes all over the place on Telegram and these social media with this guy done up in the style of an Orthodox saint with his rifle with his Nazi symbols painted on it, and they all copy that, and these school shooters in America and other places that these guys rev up, and they paint these same symbols on their weapons as an homage to this guy, who it would seem, and his family believes, was radicalised by the Ukrainian Nazis in the first place, and trained, and maybe went on safari over there. We were told this by a member of the Russian Australian community who had family on the other side of the Civil War. But they couldn't confirm it at the time, but it is now officially confirmed that that's what happened.
So the reason this whole story came about, and you wrote all this for the alert, is because we started noticing in Australia this really curious phenomenon around the National Socialist Network. We know a bit about Australian history. We know there's always been Nazis in Australia, actual neo-Nazis, etc. But they've never been promoted like so prominent like this particular organisation is. Every little thing it does gets wall-to-wall media coverage. We talked probably the last time you were on about the fact they had a 20-minute protest in front of the New South Wales State Parliament on a Saturday morning that nobody saw.
Except the media and the police.
And they got 20 hours of free publicity out of it, right? And the police approved that. Yeah.
And then the government turned around and said, see, this is why we need to reintroduce this bill. Never mind that this law that we passed back in February, never mind that the court threw it out as unconstitutional. We're going to do it again and dare you to overturn it again because look at these Nazis.
Exactly. They gave their supposed enemy the pretext they needed, right? And anyway, yesterday in Parliament, and I'll play the clip of this. Yesterday in Parliament, David Shoebridge, the Green Senator, confronted the anti-Semitism envoy, Gillian Siegel, about the fact that she has been attacking viciously the Palestine protests in Australia, people who are out there upset that babies are being blown apart in Gaza, right, as anti-Semitic. Yet as David Shoebridge said, why didn't you say anything about an actual Nazi protest? Roll the tape.
Ms. Siegel, I've seen you publicly put out proactive statements condemning pro-Palestinian protests. But when the most high-profile neo-Nazi protest is held out the front of a state parliament house, you choose not to put a proactive public statement condemning it. Can you explain how the anti-Semitism envoy didn't put out a public, clear, unambiguous statement condemning a high-profile neo-Nazi rally out the front of the New South Wales Parliament House? I mean, how could you not have?
I was initially, I might say, reluctant to give them more airplay, but I take your point, because they do crave notoriety, and history has taught us at a terrible cost that silence is absolutely not the right way.
So this is the curious thing, Richard, and what you've been able to show is that there's a part of Australian policy, foreign policy, that the government doesn't like to talk about. They pretend it's not true. They just attack anyone who says it. But in fact, aids and abets, because we're pro-Ukraine, aids and abets actual Nazis in Ukraine, always has. They've always been part of the picture. And parallel to that, we have Nazis in Australia connected to those Nazis in Ukraine who are seemingly riding high like they've never ridden before.
Yeah. And it's not just these are the literal head kickers of the operation. But we should remind everybody, the global head of the umbrella organisation for this stuff, the late Stefan Romaniev.
Yeah, that's right.
He was a Ukrainian national or child of Ukrainian. These people, these kind of people that we were talking about, who were brought over here. He was the global chair of the OUNB, the Organisation of Ukrainian Nationalists of Stepan Bandera, who was the nationalist ideologue and Nazi collaborator that all of these guys look up to. They have torchlight marches on his birthday on the 1st of January every year through Kiev since they took over the country.
Ukraine's Hitler. He was Ukraine's Hitler.
And this guy is Albanese's best mate, who he gave a state funeral for when he died
last year, middle of last year.
Yeah, late June of last year over in Poland on yet another support mission for these same Nazi militias that these...
And it was Morrison's best mate before that.
Yeah, and these, the same people that this Sewell and his cohorts are the local sort of recruitment and support agency for.
I was working with the Ukrainian community in Australia, people in the Ukrainian community, to try and get publicity for the fact that we gave an overt Nazi state funeral last year. No one in the mainstream media wanted to touch it. One of the people in the Ukrainian community who was working with me is a former state member of parliament. And we could get nobody in the Australian media to touch this because when it comes to these big foreign policy issues, all the media is in lockstep, right? They just lock it down. And there's a glaring issue here that this National Socialist Network phenomenon is part of. And look, just quickly, before we run out of time, I just want to mention, we'll put a link to this below, actually. I wrote an article this week for Pearls and Irritations about my experience with Malcolm Fraser. And in the middle of that article, I tell the story of how I helped Malcolm Fraser get an interview on RT in March 2014, straight after the coup in Ukraine. And Malcolm Fraser had written an article just for The Guardian in early March, where he actually said, he cited in that article, hey, we're in bed with some unsavory characters over there. And he called them, anti-Semitic, anti-Jew, pro-fascist. He said that in the article. So he was on record for saying that. And then RT wanted to interview him. At the time, most people would have run away from being on Russian media in those days. Malcolm Fraser didn't hesitate, right? I approached him, he didn't hesitate. He got on RT. That's now down off the internet. You can't get it on YouTube anymore, but we'll put a link to the transcript on our website. And there is actually a link, there is a website you can actually go and see the interview. We'll put that as well. Someone did get a copy of the interview and put it up online. We'll put that there as well. But it just shows you that people once upon a time in Australia were prepared to call this out. But in the latter period, we've been increasingly submissive to NATO, etc. As you said, we're giving them more money. Again, apparently it's up to $2 billion what we've donated to Ukraine. And one of the symptoms of that, we believe, is now what's happening on the streets of Australia. And we need to call that out. But Richard, we've definitely run out of time. So listen, thank you very much for joining us and for that research.
Thanks, Robbie.
Thanks to the viewer for watching the show. Tune in next week for more of the Citizens Report.